Modern art, it sells for a fortune in exclusive galleries, but what's it ever done for us? Has it influenced the clothes that we wear, or the buildings that we live in, the cars that we drive, the books we read to our children, even the way that we think? I'm Alistair Sook, and I earn a living writing about art. And in this series, I'm going to explore the life and work of 4 titans of the 20th century: Henri Matisse, Pablo Picasso, Salvador Dali, and Andy Warhol. They all changed their world, but have they changed ours? This week, Picasso. It goes something like this. Picasso has a visitor, and the visitor says, "What is art?" Picasso thinks about it, then he points to his sculpture of a bicycle saddle and a pair of handlebars which he combined to make a bull's head, and he shrugs. "What is art?" "What is not?" he replies. Yo, El Rey, Picasso wrote on an early self-portrait. It means, I the king. It showed a self-confidence that he'd never lose, in art or with women. Understandable, really, when in your own lifetime you're the richest and most famous artist who's ever lived. So famous, in fact, his name's now part of our language. If something goes awry, it's gone a bit Picasso. His work is instantly recognisable, often compared to a child's, with eyes in the wrong places and noses sticking out in strange directions. But it still manages to sell quite well. This one, called Dora Maar with a cat, went for $95 million. Picasso chose to paint like this, despite the fact that he could paint like this by the time he was 16. Instead, he spent his life restlessly innovating, ripping apart conventional art and shocking the world. So why did he do it? And does it matter to us today that he went all Picasso? If anyone wants to know anything about Picasso, they ask his friend and biographer, John Richardson. So first, I've come to New York to meet him. Feeling pretty thrilled at the prospect of meeting someone who genuinely knew Picasso and knew him really well. He spent a lot of time with him, and so he's not just a kind of authority on the art, but he really understood what made Picasso tick as the man as well. Jump to the jam, boogie woogie jam slam, bust the dialect. John, how long have you lived in this apartment? Because it's...
I've lived here about 12 years, and I was lucky I found this loft space.
John Richardson became a close friend of Picasso in the 1950s, and his apartment contains an extraordinary collection of memorabilia.
Here we are, going to the bullfight in Arles, and leading the throng. And there is Polo, Picasso's son, Picasso, his yet-to-be wife, Jacqueline.
And you?
And then there's me here.
But look how many people there are. This is like a scene out of The Godfather or something.
Well, I don't know why we were the forefront of this crowd, but this was just going through the streets towards the arena. And we used to do this all through the summer.
There's Picasso in his pants. Was this quite common? You'd turn up at the studio and there he would be reclining?
He often worked in just a pair of shorts. And, you know, Cannes in the summer was hot. And he loved going to the beach. He went to the beach a lot.
You must have lots of works. Here's a Picasso, for example. What's this piece?
That's a portrait of Jacqueline, his wife. What's the date of it? 60...
That's 1960, it
60,
says.
Yep.
And he was obviously very generous, was he? He'd just give you things.
He was very generous by nature.
This whole place is a treasure trove, and I can see here, I mean, this is a tiny picture of... This is Picasso as a tiny boy.
This is Picasso aged, I suppose, 7.
You can see those prominent eyes already, that's there.
Yeah, and the authority, you know it.
Pablo Picasso was born in Malaga, on the Mediterranean coast of Spain, in 1881. He was able to draw before he could speak, and supposedly the first word he spoke was the Spanish for pencil. His father, Don Jose, an art teacher, was astounded by his son's natural talent. His father was an artist, right? I mean...
Father was a very bad artist, and I would imagine a very good art teacher, because, I mean, Picasso learnt everything from his father. Rather like people who have a child who's going to be a child star. I mean, he had to draw and draw and draw and draw and draw, and Picasso became absolutely obsessed with drawing. Drawing was the heart of his work, and if you couldn't draw, there's no point. He hated the word virtuosity, but I mean his incredible ability to draw in any style he wanted.
Pablo Picasso actually began life as Pablo Ruiz, because Ruiz was his father's surname. But even on this early sketch, Pablo was practicing signing his mother's maiden name, Picasso. Later in his life, Picasso said, "Can you imagine me being called Ruiz?" Because Ruiz is a very common Spanish name. The surname Picasso also contains the word pica, and this would have appealed to young Pablo. Because a picador is a horseman in bullfighting who lances the bull. Picasso once said that if he hadn't been a painter, he would have been one of these guys, a picador. The word picador comes from the Spanish picard, which means to irritate or provoke. And you could say that's exactly what Picasso did all his life. Obviously not in the bull ring, but in his relationships with others, definitely. Most important, in his art. Young Pablo revered the picador so much, one was the subject of his first oil painting, made when he was around 8. At the age of only 12, Picasso could already draw like this. And at 16, he'd won a place at Madrid's prestigious Academy of Fine Art. In Madrid, Picasso studied the greats, like this by the old Spanish master Velázquez, and he made a perfectly respectable copy. So even as a teenager, Picasso had pretty much got the hang of classical painting. But he was deeply unhappy at art school, and within a year he'd left, moving to Barcelona, where his father was now a professor of art. Here he began mixing with arty bohemian types, and met Carlos Casagemas, a fellow artist who became Picasso's best friend. In 1900, around his 19th birthday, Picasso and Casagemas left Spain and moved to the epicenter of world art, Paris. This was where any ambitious young artist needed to be. Paris was also the European capital of sin, home to hundreds of brothels, the Moulin Rouge, and sordid bars where artists and poets downed absinthe with anarchists and vagabonds. Picasso and Casagemas joined the city's horde of impoverished bohemians, gorging on every vice available. Picasso's paintings, like this one, reflected their pastimes. But Casagemas was a troubled soul, in love with a girl called Germaine, who didn't love him, and drinking heavily. One night in 1901, Casagemas decided that he'd had enough of Paris, so he invited Germaine and a bunch of friends to a farewell dinner in this very cafe, which I'm guessing has changed just a little bit. After they'd drunk several bottles of wine, Casagemas stood up and he gave an incoherent, slurry speech in French, and then suddenly he pulled a pistol from one pocket and aimed it at Germaine and fired. Luckily, she sensed what was coming, ducked down, and the bullet just grazed her neck. But then, to the horror of all of his friends and all of the customers, Casagemus swiveled the revolver round to his own temple and pulled the trigger, and he was dead within an hour. The death of his greatest friend devastated Picasso, and his sorrow permeated his art. For the next few years, Casagemus would appear regularly in Picasso's works, and most significantly of all, he began to paint almost exclusively in blue. He depicted outcasts, isolation, and despair, as if that was all that he could see. But his misery led to his first distinct style, now known as his blue period. Although still relatively classical, he was painting from the heart, using blue to express profound emotion, rather than just accurately copying reality. The sorrowful power of these paintings would capture imaginations far beyond the world of art. But did Picasso play a part in defining blue as the colour of sadness? While blues music actually came first, Picasso did influence jazz legend Miles Davis, who released an album called Blue Period in 1951. Author Richard Williams has written about the influence of the colour blue in modern times.
Well, I think the Blue Period paintings were very important in establishing the meaning of blue for the 20th century in art and culture. Miles, as a jazz musician, would have grown up playing the blues. You know, it's probably the first thing he ever learned how to play, I should think. Miles Davis, Kind of Blue, the most popular jazz album of all time. Just before he made this record, on another record that he made with his great friend, collaborator, the composer and arranger Gil Evans, Gil had written a piece for him